Welcome to Dove and Dragon Radio from Triot Press. I'm your host, M.L.Ruscsak. Today's episode is brought to you by Hella Shirt Company, a hella dope clothing brand crafted in North California. Today's guest today is Mark Bello. Welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Now, you write you're a social justice advocate, but you write a little bit of crime dramas, if I'm looking at everything you've written.
Well, it's kind of a long story, but I do write social justice legal thrillers, mainly about issues that are topical in America today.
Well, we have a lot of topical things in America.
I never lack for material, that's for sure.
Oh, I know you could write oodles of books just on last year alone.
That's true. I haven't actually started working on anything that relates to last year specifically, but for instance, over the last few years, I wrote a book called Betrayal High about a school shooting, loosely based on Parkland. I wrote a book called Betrayal in Black, which is about a young Black man being shot by a white police officer. My latest book, which is coming out in April, is called Supreme Betrayal, and it's about a Supreme Court justice who has a sexual assault in his past. So you can see that the things I write are inspired by real life events.
Oh, very much so. How much of the real life events you pull does your advocacy and your being an attorney play in your books?
Well, I mentioned it was a long story. The short version of it is that I didn't start being an author until very late in my legal career. So I handled a case in the 1980s involving two young teenagers who were molested by a Catholic priest. And we handled the case, and the church behaved very poorly and lied, covered up things like prior incidents and prior victims. And we worked very hard to uncover all of this stuff. We're successful in doing so and successfully resolved the case. It felt like there was some organization within the church that had a job to cover these things up. So I decided to write a book about it. I always told myself I was going to fulfill a bucket list item and write a book. And I wrote a book called Betrayal of Faith that invented an organization called the Coalition. And the Coalition's job was like a CIA kind of organization within the church that covered these things up by any means possible. And over a period of a few years, I wrote Betrayal of Faith, could not get it published and released it independently. And I thought I was done. I thought that was the only book I was going to write. I fulfilled my bucket list item and I was done. Then the 2016 election came along. And I got very upset at the possibility that a certain person might become president of the United States on a platform of banning all Muslims from the country and Muslim travel and calling Hispanic people drug dealers and pushers and stuff like that. So I wrote a second book called Betrayal of Justice about a bigoted president. A lot of people have jumped on me over that book and said I did a hit job on Donald Trump. And my response my famous response is that I finished the book before he became president. So he imitated my guy. I didn't imitate him.
Sometimes life mimics art, right?
That's what happened there. I mean, obviously his candidacy
it sparked something in the creative process, but it wasn't based on his presidency because he wasn't president yet.
And worse than that, he had a choice to not be the candidate he was as president. He could have been a president for all the people and done a much more inclusive president and done a much better job. And he chose his way, whatever that was.
Mm-hmm. So now we have Supreme Betrayal coming out in April. What is that one about?
Supreme Betrayal is based on the Kavanaugh hearings. And I want to, before everybody accuses me, as they did with Betrayal of Justice, in doing a hit job on Brett Kavanaugh, I will state categorically that Betrayal High is not based on Brett Kavanaugh. It is inspired by the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. The predator in my case, unlike Kavanaugh, has been declared guilty. He has committed the acts in his youth. A young lady, 20 years after the sexual assault perpetrated by the candidate happened, finds out he's the presidential nominee for the open seat on the Supreme Court and decides that this is a bridge too far for her. She's allowed his career to continue for 20 years from going to law school, becoming a lawyer, becoming a judge, being appointed to the Court of Appeals, being appointed to the federal bench, and finding out that he's going to be the candidate for the Supreme Court is the final straw. So she hires Zachary Blake, my lawyer protagonist in all of my books, to essentially prevent that from happening. And it was inspired by the Kavanaugh situation, but it's its own story.
Right. What readers have to understand, we as authors take an instance in time. It could be something that we see on the news, something we see playing out in front of us, and we spin it in our own way to make a fictional book. It doesn't mean we're taking the actual case or the actual person. We're being inspired by something that we're seeing or hearing.
And I'm not apologizing. I'm just explaining the issue. I don't really care, frankly, whether
all publicity is good publicity, right?
I guess. I mean, I just, all I'm saying is, however people feel about me or feel about the things I write about, they're fictional accounts.
You can take a science a science fantasy and find a parallel to something in reality. It doesn't mean that it happened or it will happen or could happen. It's just how we spin the story. We take.
I also believe these are very important issues.
Yes.
We're dealing with books that cover clergy abuse in book 1, presidential misconduct in book 2, white supremacy in book 3, cop on black shootings in book 4.
The Holocaust. I'm looking right now at the
high school shootings in book 5. Sexual assault in the Supreme Court in book 6, and my novella tells the story of an escape from Auschwitz during World War II.
So everything there has a social message that has to be. Authors write books like this to get us talking about the social issue. It's not to take the social issue and spin it into whatever. It's to get us talking about the social issue.
And that's the important aspect of this. No question.
We have to have an open dialogue. If we sit down, you put red against blue on an aisle on a social issue, all you're going to get a bunch of arguing. Now you do it on a platform where it's fictional, you're still getting the message across, and you can have an open dialect.
No question. And that's, that's one of the things that troubles me about America today. If a friend of yours tells you that they support this or that, and you support that or this, the complete opposite of this or that, suddenly you can't be friends anymore. Suddenly you can't talk anymore.
Social injustices and make us talk about it in a real open dialogue without actually
they will see the social injustice, the David versus Goliath battle that the lawyers on the front lines face almost every day.
I mean, I don't get a lot of political stuff because that's me. I don't talk political outside my family. But when you have a social injustice and you can talk about it in art, then you can get down to the root cause in reality.
Well, my books are primarily legal novels. They educate people on the legal system in an entertaining way. But given the fact that they're what I call ripped from the headlines kind of novels, they have a political swing. I'm not going to run from that.
Right.
Each book has some political as well as legal message. And I err on the side of justice for the little guy rather than injustice perpetrated by the government, by criminals, by white-collar criminals, by large corporations, etc. So certainly they're David versus Goliath tales, and admittedly somewhat slanted that way. But they do take and explain all sides of an issue and should provoke a conversation.
They very much should. I mean, we had Matlock back in the 80s and early 90s. So that was my legal experience with art. But it took some of the shows, if you can go back and watch them, have some of that social play going into them. Not a lot, but it was always the underdog winning against the bigger person.
Yes. Yes. I would say that's true.
I have a little bit of legal knowledge.
What's that?
I have a little bit of legal knowledge, even if it's just from Mark. So we have Spring Betrayal coming out. Are you currently writing another novel?
I am. I'm writing a novel about the immigration issues from the point of view of the problems at the southern border, mm-hmm. and a couple that immigrated legally from Venezuela, had children in America, were citizens, but overstayed their visa. And that's one part of the story. The other part of the story is a young woman who decides to take her infant daughter to Syria to meet her grandmother for the first time, even though Syria is engaged in a semi-civil war at the Turkish border near Kobani. And she gets caught up in an ISIS hostage situation. So the book goes back and forth between those two classes of immigrants. And you'll have to read it to find out how they're resolved.
Oh, I can't wait to read it, but you have to finish writing it first.
But that book is almost done. I had a little incident over the last week or two where I had to have emergency surgery.
Oh no!
So I'm not completely myself right now, but I'm doing my best. And that laid me up at home for a while, so I was able to work on my book almost exclusively. So the good news is that it allowed me to substantially finish my 7th novel.
Well, sometimes the medical emergencies push us to do something that we've been wanting to do. In your case, writing the 7th novel.
What's the expression about taking something and turning it into sugar or whatever?
Take the lemons and turn it into lemonade.
Yeah, that. Yeah. I was a little more what's the word? Potty mouthed.
Well, I was raised with.
I like yours better.
I have a Southern upbringing, so I get some of those everywhere. So we have that one coming out. Let's talk a little bit about the one with the Holocaust. I know it's just a novella,
right?
But everything's based on true events. I mean, your truthful is Auschwitz. There's truthful that a Holocaust existed, and there's truthful of World War II. The rest of it, we will say, is fiction. But where did you get all of your inspiration of that one?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, I'm not a direct descendant of Holocaust victims, but I am a descendant of people who fled Russia during the pogroms on my father's side, and Poland pre-World War II on my mother's side. And a lot of my mother's, my grandmother's generation on my mother's side, and my mother's cousins were prisoners during the Holocaust. Many of them perished, and some of them escaped. And I don't mean escaped prison camps, but escaped with their lives,
right,
when the war was over. So I've had a kind of this back of the mind, I'd love to tell a compelling Holocaust story someday. And I was reading an account, a true story of a gentleman whose name escaped me for the purpose of this interview, but he was a Polish gentleman who got put in a work camp. And there's a book out, an older book, about his rather famous escape from a prison camp. And that, I use that as an inspiration to tell a story about Zachary Blake prior to his legal career, prior to going to law school, on his 13th birthday, at the time of his bar mitzvah. And his maternal grandfather, Max Lewin, had always promised him that when he became a man, he would tell him the story of his escape from Auschwitz. And on the eve of his bar mitzvah, his Zeta, as many Jewish people call their grandfathers, fulfilled his promise and told Zach the story. And the book, or the novella rather, retells the story of this incredible survival and escape from the death camp.
I thank you for writing that.
It's a pretty neat little 50-page story.
I mean, it's a short story, but my generation, my daughter's generation, doesn't hear enough about the atrocities of World War II. And when you bring it back to our time, and we have it in a fictional setting, but still based in reality, you still get some of the feel for what happened back then.
Well, worse than that is there is a segment of our society that are Holocaust deniers that claim it didn't happen. Some of them were part of the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. And just like we hear all the time at Holocaust museums across the country and around the world, and from Holocaust survivors, if you stop talking about it, it will be forgotten. So
it's not only it would be forgotten, it would be repeated.
That too, but the point I'm making is the book is my very little contribution to the retelling of these stories. You know, it's interesting. If you think about the Jewish religion in general, almost every holiday that Jewish people celebrate is the retelling of some atrocity
that happened
committed to the Jewish people. So anywhere from Passover to Hanukkah to pick a holiday.
I'm not Jewish, so I don't know the holidays, but
what my family members are fond of saying is every Jewish holiday is in short, quote, they tried to kill us, they failed, let's eat.
Yeah, that's basically it.
That is essentially every Jewish holiday.
I have a lot of Jewish friends, and that's basically what they say is, oh, it's a holiday. Yeah. We are celebrating someone trying to kill us, but we're going to eat because we're here.
they tried, or the other way to say that is they tried to kill us, we beat them. Let's eat. But either way.
It depends on if they're passive or passive aggressive. So,
Yep.
But I do thank you for that one, because we do need to retell these stories to the next generation. That's another reason with all your books, we need to keep retelling the story to keep it in our brains, so we talk about it, so we don't repeat some of these social things that's been going on since 2000 whatever, or beyond that even.
Two very interesting things about Le Dor Vodor, from generation to generation, the Holocaust story. One is, when you read it, realize that for the most part, even though the characters are fictional, the story is true. And it's almost told as the true story goes. I just changed the characters, especially the main character from Christian to Jewish, and a little bit of the circumstances have been manipulated and embellished for fictional purposes. The second thing is that the novella is absolutely free. If you go to my website at markmbello.com, that's MARKMBELLO.com, and subscribe, you can get you can download the novella rather, for free. So those are two important issues.
Yeah, as you said, it's a 50-page read. It's a short 30-minute read, maybe for the average person. So it's not going to tie up a lot of time, but it's going to get you to think. If we can get some people to think right now, that would be great.
Well, and I want people to read it, so I make it available for free.
Yeah. Well, that can be an opening to, well, it is an opening because your main character, your lawyer, that's when he's 13. So he's in the first in that novella and goes all through the rest of them.
Well, that is my sneaky hope. But
well, I just gave away this.
If you choose to just download a novella, that's your right.
Mm-hmm. So other than your website, we can find you on Amazon.
Yes.
And
you can find me at almost all online booksellers, Apple, Kobo, Barnes & Noble. My books are available on all of those platforms.
That is wonderful. And do you have social media accounts that the readers and listeners can find you on?
I do. I have a Goodreads profile. I have an Amazon profile, as you know. Mm-hmm. I have a Facebook page, Twitter. I'm an old man, so some of this stuff is a little foreign to me technological wise. Like I'm still playing and learning with how to use Instagram.
I just learned Instagram last year, so you're not that far behind.
I have a LinkedIn profile, so I'm. You can find me on all of these platforms.
I'm pretty sure if they Google your name, they will find you in one platform or another.
Yes. Yes.
Most authors, you can find about 10 pages of where the author's been just by Googling their name.
By the way, I also frequently blog. So I'm a featured writer for the Legal Examiner magazine, newspaper. Mm-hmm. You can find me there, and I blog on my own website about social issue and safety issues at markmbello.com. So there's a lot of content out there that I've written that you can find. I've also done some articles for publications like Legal Examiner and the Hill. Mm-hmm. Political stuff.
Well, we can find you just about anywhere from the political side and the fictional side. Well, anywhere on Google.
And most of my politics is fictional. I just happen to choose what I consider to be important social justice issues to write about.
We do need the social injustices brought back to light. We need to talk about it, but we don't need to burn the city down to get acknowledgement on the social injustice. There has to be a fine line where we're not destroying things, but we're talking about it.
Well, it's interesting. Innocently, I posted a question when I wrote Betrayal in Black, my fourth novel. Mm-hmm. I posted a question on my Facebook page, something to the effect of how many innocent lives, Black lives, must be taken before those who swear to protect and serve stop the madness. And I got attacked like you wouldn't believe. Black people commit all the crimes. 12% of the population are Black, but 35% of all violent crime is Black. 75% of Black families are single parent. If you keep voting for Democrats who use racism as a political tool, it will never end. How many whites have to die? Everybody's concerned about the Blacks. Have you forgotten that George Floyd tried to pass a $20 bill? He had to be stopped. It just blows my mind that that was the reaction I got. My question is, when did we start holding police officers to a lower standard than criminals?
True.
When did we start blaming victims for the criminal and brutal acts of perpetrators?
This is true.
When did police officers obtain the right to stop, charge, conduct a trial, and then execute to death or sentence to death and execute the victim or the subject, the suspect, excuse me. So I was very troubled by that response. The fact that George Floyd, and my book is not about George Floyd, by the way, but
it's a name that we're all familiar with.
But, you know, George, even if it's true that George Floyd tried to pass a $20 bill, which we still, to this day, don't know whether he did or not, the sentence for passing a $20 bill is death. Somebody kneeling on your neck for 9 minutes and killing you. That's okay with the number of people that responded to that little Facebook post. It kind of blows my mind. White fragility is a real phenomenon.
See, I come from a family that has police, first responders, and military all within the family. So me hearing that, hey, it's okay for a police officer to take a life in this case just didn't sit well. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, there's more going on. Let's take 2 minutes. Let's actually look at all the facts, not just 2 minutes of facts. And then let's actually get an investigation going. That was my whole thing during the thing. We can't burn the city down. We can't take a siege of the city. We can't cause destruction of personal and business property. We cannot take other lives because that was what was going on there. But to just protest this one instance, we need to have time to actually investigate both the victim in this case and the officer that was in the case. We need time to do that. We can't, neither side can be jury and executioner in the same day.
No question. And by the way, I don't equate peaceful protest with looting, and I don't understand the connection. There are those who will say they can understand where that comes from. I don't happen to be one of them. My attitude is a crime is a crime. You don't fix one problem or stop one level of criminality by committing criminality yourself.
Correct.
So I agree that looting is not appropriate anywhere, anytime. There is some question as to who was doing looting and whether or not looting was being done to make a certain segment of society look bad. And I don't know one way or the other. Yeah. But I do know that when a young Black male after a young black male gets killed for little reason by a cop, who, by the way, and the interesting thing about my book and all of my books is it takes multiple points of view and talks about these issues from all perspectives. Cops have a very difficult job.
They do.
Encountering somebody with a weapon and having your own life at stake while you're doing it is not something any of us, other than a select few, would choose to do. So I don't in any way, shape, or form minimize the job that those guys do, and that 90-something% of them are good people. Mm-hmm. Having said that, there needs to be an examination, not a defunding. I don't like that word or that approach to the problem, but there certainly needs to be a reevaluation of policing and policing practices and policies. And Betrayal in Black offers those kinds of solutions from both sides of the community, from the Black Lives Matter community, as well as from the policing community. And they come together in the book and have a meaningful discussion about it. And it's a very powerful part of the novel. By the way, I hate to keep making little side marketing pitches, but it's Black History Month, and Betrayal in Black has been reduced in price to celebrate Black History Month, and people can buy the ebook for only 99 cents on Amazon today.
Well, we thank you for that. We do thank you for being on the show today. It was a very interesting conversation.
My pleasure.
And again, we can find you on Google and your website and Amazon. So thank you so much for being on the show today, Mark.
My pleasure, Melissa. Thanks for having me.
And to our readers and our listeners, happy reading.